Okay, so I'm going to spend just a couple of minutes talking with you about what's on the horizon for alternative marine fuels here in Washington State. Greg mentioned that there's some bold new changes coming in fuels, and that's a good thing. And I think part of my goal for this presentation is to add the "and" to that. That's a good thing. And there's some things that we'll need to think about. All right, here's the topics that I'm going to try to run through in pretty quick order. I've only got 15 minutes, so I want to get my key thoughts out there right up front. So here they are. Alternative fuel vessels are in Washington State now, and there's more coming. The federal and state regulations don't fully cover non-oil fuels. And in the face of this, industry is asking us for regulatory certainty. Here at Ecology, we've got a near-term goal to close the gap between state and federal prevention and inspection regulations. We think this will help, and I'll talk about a little bit more about that in a minute. But it's not going to fully solve the challenges of alternate fuels. More work is going to need to be done, and we are not early to this table. All right, so this is just a snapshot of what marine fueling in Washington looks like today. We see about 7,000 regulated transfers to vessels in Washington. 2020 and 2024, the bookends of this graph on the left look a little bit light. That's just because those are 6-month snapshots. Even in 2020, the numbers stayed pretty consistent, and we saw about 7,000 fueling transfers to vessels a year. Most of those take place in Seattle, but there's significant numbers of transfers that take place around the Puget Sound. Less so on the Columbia River, but there are bunkerings that do take place on the river. So that's what fueling to vessels looks like today. So why are we talking about alternative fuels? What's driving that? And this document, this is what's driving the transition to alternate fuels. This is the 2023 International Maritime Organization strategy on the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions from ships. It has a bold vision to reduce greenhouse gas emissions from commercial shipping by at least 40% by 2030. So I'll say that again, because we're right here at the end of 2024, and the goal of this strategy is to reduce emissions by 40% by 2030, and to reach net zero greenhouse gas emissions from ships by around 2050. Those requirements apply to ships owned and operated by the 176 member nations of the International Maritime Organization, which includes the United States. And these are not just words on paper. When the IMO adopts standards and policies, that has rapid effects, and we see them here in Washington State. So here's an example of how that works. On January 1st of 2023, the IMO adopted new requirements for the efficiencies of marine engines. In February of 2023, so about a month later, we started seeing these devices showing up on vessels in Washington Port. So these are a couple of pictures that were taken by some of our prevention inspectors on board ships in Washington. And what you're looking at is the fuel rack of a marine diesel engine and mechanical stoppers. So I don't know if you can see my arrow. I also don't know if I got my arrow on the right screen, but there's a little bolt in the picture on the left. These are not complicated devices, right? What they've done is attached a bolt to the fuel rack that stops the fuel rack from moving when it gets to about the 65% mark. And what that means is that the horsepower from that engine is reduced to about 65% of its maximum. There's a even more simple approach over here on the right. Again, you're seeing a bolt, a mechanical stopper that's fastened to that fuel rack, and it's preventing the engine from reaching full power. That is so that these engines can meet the IMO requirements for fuel efficiency. And as I said, that was passed in London and went into effect on January 1st of 2023. And we saw the results of that here in Washington in February. Here's another example of real companies spending real money and bending metal to achieve these greenhouse gas reductions. This is showing a container ship that operates on dual fuel. So this ship burns both methanol or it can operate on purely diesel. And here's them pulling into the port of Tacoma. That was earlier this year. Additionally, the Northwest Seaport Alliance, which is the ports of Seattle and Tacoma, have entered into 2 Green Corridor pilot projects. So a Green Corridor agreement is a partnership between ports, and it's intended to ensure availability of a specific fuel type. Right? If you're going to make the leap to burning a new type of fuel in your ships, you want to know that when you get across the Pacific Ocean, you'll have access to that fuel in your destination port. So a Green Corridor is looking to solve that problem by agreeing that that ships will use a particular kind of fuel, and that fuel will be available where they need it. So the 2 pilots that the Northwest Seaport Alliance is engaged in, one is with the Republic of Korea, and this will involve vessel carriers and container ships burning green methanol traveling between Korea and Seattle and Tacoma. The second one is looking at cruise ships. So obviously the cruise industry is a big component of vessel traffic here in Washington, going up to Alaska and making stops in Canada. And the Green Corridor Initiative for cruise ships is seeking to have 4 cruise ships burning green methanol by 2032. Speaking with the Port of Seattle, which is where we got this slide from, they expect to have the first green methanol burning ships in Washington ports in 2025. So pretty quickly now. All right, so what's the and here? Why are we talking about this at this annual meeting? As I said, reducing greenhouse gases and getting global shipping to net zero is a bold and ambitious goal with obvious benefits to everyone. And these fuels are not benign, right? Methanol, hydrogen, ammonia, LNG, each of the candidate fuels has its own portfolio of hazards and challenges that come with it. So what I'm showing here is an example of some of those hazards related to methanol. And this slide I got from Jim Elliott with TNT Marine Salvage. And they look at the salvage and marine firefighting aspects of some of these new fuels. So I want to talk just a little bit about what state and federal laws and rules cover right now. Here in Washington State, we're very fortunate. We have strong laws and regulations around oil spill prevention, preparedness, and response that we all benefit from. And for hazardous substances, we do have some laws that are currently in place. So our response requirements, our reporting requirements, and the requirement for a spiller to pay for the spill, the cleanup of the spill, those all apply to both oil and hazardous substance spills. So a methanol spill or another chemical spill is already covered under our response, notification, and liability laws. But our preparedness and prevention laws and rules are specific to oil. And that includes our facility standards, our vessel oil transfer requirements, and our rules for bunkering operations. On the federal side, the federal regulations for transfers to vessels do apply to both oil and to liquid hazardous materials. but liquefied gases are specifically excluded from that. And also excluded are the federal response and preparedness requirements. So what that means is that there is no vessel response plan requirement for a ship that is burning ammonia or methanol or hydrogen. So if the Dolly that collided with the Francis Scott Key Bridge in Baltimore, if that vessel had been burning methanol, there would not be a vessel response plan. There would not be an OSRO on contract, right? An oil spill response organization. There wouldn't be a designated QI, and there wouldn't be requirements for salvage and marine firefighting contracts to already be in place. So if under today's laws and rules, both at the state level and at the federal level, an incident involving a spill from an alternative fueled vessel does not have any of the infrastructure in place that we have counted on since Open 90 for an oil-fired vessel. And industry is aware of all this, and they are asking for regulatory certainty. You'll hear this from vessel owners, from port districts, and as I mentioned, from the salvage and firefighting community. So these recommendations, again, are from TNT Marine Salvage, and they are asking for government agencies to come together to do risk studies and to change the legal framework that vessels operate under. So I think that it's prudent that we as state regulators are clear-eyed about both the benefits that we hope to collectively achieve with these new fuels and the hazards that accompany these new uses of combustible chemicals. All right, so what are we here at Ecology doing about this? One step that we have taken is adding an initiative in our 2025 to 2030 strategic plan to close the gap between our state requirements and federal regulations. This would add facility and vessel transfer requirements for liquid hazardous substances equivalent to the current federal rules. So you might be asking yourself, if our strategy is only going to get us to where the federal regulations are right now, does that really change anything? And I would argue that it does. A spill prevention benefit of this initiative is it will allow our ecology prevention staff to conduct compliance inspections on transfers of alternative fuels, which currently we can't do. We inspect approximately 600 oil transfers a year, which far outpaces what the Coast Guard has the capacity for. And we find compliance issues in 1 out of about every 10 to 12 oil transfers that we inspect. And that shows that there's still plenty of good spill prevention work to do related to oil, which has been used as a marine fuel for over 150 years. So as these new fuels come onto the scene, I think there is also going to be a lot of learning to be done and some oversight and prevention work that we think should be part of the equation. All right, so back to the key thoughts, and it looks like I'm doing okay on time. Hopefully I've convinced you that alternative fuel vessels are not a mirage. We're starting to see them now, and we're going to see more in the future. We do have some gaps in our regulatory framework. Industry recognizes this, and they would prefer that agencies take action to reduce their decision risks. At Ecology, we have a moderate, relatively near-term goal to close some of the regulatory gaps and enable our prevention inspectors to help protect Washington waters against these new hazards. But that's not going to be the end of this story. A lot more work is going to be needed by everyone, including, I think, everyone who is participating in this meeting, to put in place a mature and comprehensive prevention, preparedness, and response ecosystem. All right, I'm showing that I'm at 14 minutes and 45 seconds, and that's the end of my presentation. Thank you.